Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, the show where we cut through cybersecurity noise and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. This podcast is built around one core idea: cyber fusion. A cyber fusion center brings together IT security, operational technology, engineering insight, and human risk into a single coordinated defense strategy. So threats are detected earlier, response is faster, and operation stays running. Each episode, we sit down with security leaders, operators, and industry experts to unpack the real threats facing modern organizations, especially where cyber risk becomes operational risk. No hype, no theory, just practical insight on cyber resilience, operational continuity, and defending critical systems without disruption. If you're responsible for uptime, safety, or business continuity, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, where we cut through cybersecurity noise and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. I'm your host, Gary Mullen. Joining me today are three industry veterans who live this every day. Chris Mosley, who's PhishCloud's Director of Operational Technologies, Cyber Fusion, and Strategy, brings decades of experience in securing critical infrastructure and industrial systems. We also have joining us Chris Whiteman, Senior OT Threat Hunter at PhishCloud, and we also have Chris Mosley. A lot of Chris's on the call today. He is our OT Threat Detection Response Analyst, and we're going to focus today on cyber fusion centers, what they really are, why so many organizations get them wrong, and what it takes to build one that delivers real value from the boardroom all the way to the front lines. A true cyber fusion center isn't just a rebranded SOC. It's a strategy and an operating model, one that unifies security, IT operations, threat intelligence, and incident response into a single coordinated capability. The goal isn't more alerts. It's earlier detection, faster decisions, and resilience without disruption. In this episode, we're going to explore cyber fusion from three critical perspectives: the executive leadership side, threat hunters, and the practitioners doing the work every day. So let's dive in. Welcome the three Chris's. Glad to have you on our podcast today. The first question I'm going to ask to Chris Mosley. A lot of organizations claim that they have a cyber fusion center, but in reality, it's just a renamed or rebranded SOC, Security Operations Center. What are the clear indicators that a fusion center is real versus just cosmetic?
That's a great question. And honestly, it is one of the biggest problems in our industry right now. The rebrand, the SOC phenomenon is rampant. So let me give you some clear indicators of a real fusion center versus what I call SOC theater, right? First, data integration. A real fusion center has unified telemetry from security tools, IT operations, business systems, and external threat intelligence. All of that flowing into a common analytic platform. If your fusion center is still making analysts pivot between 15 and 20 different consoles or tool UIs to correlate a single incident, then you've just renamed your SOC. It's not a different thing. A second thing is team structure. This is huge. A cosmetic fusion center still has separate teams that throw tickets over the wall to each other, right? They don't actually work together. A real fusion center has cross-functional teams that work the same queue. Threat hunters sitting next to incident responders, sitting next to network engineers. That way, when you solve a problem, they're having conversations in real time, not just filling out a ticket and then sending the ticket over the wall. Third is decision rights. In a renamed SOC, analysts need to escalate everything up the chain and then across to another department. And then in a real fusion center, the team has the authority to take action across domains. There is if there's a credential compromise, then they can disable an account immediately. They can isolate an endpoint, or they can block the C2 domain and notify the business owner at the time, right? That's what your BSOs are for. All without having to wait for 4 different approval chains before something can take effect. Because, these days, time is money. And especially in an operations environment, if I can't stop the chain of attack immediately, then it takes effect. Fourth, workflows and playbooks. Cosmetic fusion centers, those guys that are just renamed, have separate run books for each different team. Real fusion centers have a unified playbook. When X happens, we do Y. And they span the entire incident lifecycle. The response to ransomware isn't just SOC detects, incident response investigates, IT remediates. It's one coordinated workflow. All of these things need to happen in conjunction with each other. And really, the litmus test is simple. Can your team detect, investigate, and remediate a multi-stage attack spanning cloud, on-prem, endpoint without any handoffs? If the answer is no, then you've just rebranded yourself.
Very good. So let's take that down to where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, where the junior analysts, the sysadmins, the incident responders that you talk about are. How does working in a real cyber fusion center actually change their day-to-day activities? Chris Mosley, how does this impact onboarding, learning, training, burnout, career development, all of the things that these people are concerned with on a day-to-day basis?
It's kind of a loaded question, so I'll try to hit all your points there. As it comes to the day-to-day, you don't have to do as much individually because you have a whole team working with you. So if you're working in like a SOC, right, something comes in, everybody's going to jump on it. Everybody's doing a million different jobs. When you're in a cyber fusion center, a lot of it is something comes in, okay, I have to do this one thing, and then everybody else is doing their one thing. And then hopefully by the end of it, as long as it's working right, you'll have a functioning solved ticket. When it comes to the onboarding is a little interesting because it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, it's pretty streamlined compared to everywhere else because you only have to learn one job. You only have to learn one set of tools, one set of functions, one set of responsibilities. But at the same time, if not everybody is on the same page in the CFC, it can cause some onboarding problems. I know I personally experienced that. But if not everybody's on the same page, it could definitely cause some issues during the onboarding process. Similar state with the learning aspect of it. Because everything is separated and individualized, you don't have to learn as many tools, you don't have to learn as many responsibilities because, something comes in that is the threat hunt side versus the incident response side that you don't really, yes, you need to understand what's going on, but you're not in charge of taking on that responsibility and doing all of those tasks. You only have to do the stuff that's part of incident response versus the stuff that the threat hunter is doing. I mean, obviously there's going to be some overlap. Burnout's going to happen anywhere, right? No matter what job you go to, give it enough time, burnout's going to happen. But with the Cyber Fusion Center, it's not as bad because it's much harder to get overwhelmed with responsibilities and with things to do because you like I said, there's only a limited number of things you need to worry about on any given incident. So it's a lot harder to get burnt out of doing everything because you don't have to do everything. That's what the CFC is for. And with the career development side of things, it's definitely very helpful, to say the least, because a lot of people in our industry end up not being a jack of all trades type of individual. They end up specializing, whether it's they're specializing in threat hunting or they're specializing in malware or they're specializing in security. You end up specializing. In a CFC, the career path helps guide you towards that specialization because I keep going back to the same point of you end up using the same tools, doing the same thing, and you're not ending up doing everything all at once.
I'd actually point out that, adding to that because it is a cyber fusion center, you have everybody kind of in that group together. Your junior analysts end up getting exposure to the threat hunt side of things by watching the threat hunters and working with them. Or look, if they're already doing incident response, maybe they're working more with the network engineers. Right, so they get more exposure to the totality through that threat hunt, through the whole fusion center concept.
Right, understood. Well, let's get a little bit more granular. Chris Whiteman is a threat hunter, and you deal in looking at multiple angles and threat vectors and possible paths of attack within an organization. So, from a threat hunting standpoint and an intelligence standpoint, how does a fusion center change the game for you? What becomes possible when telemetry and context and vectors and all of these teams across the organization are truly unified?
Yeah, it's a massive difference. In short, it's greater understanding and then speed. And that's like the flow of information, the speed at which information flows and is freely shared.
Mhm.
And that's not easy to build. But from the intelligence side, like threat hunt and intelligence teams are both sources of intelligence. They're mutually supportive and in coordination are kind of force multipliers for the CFC.
Mhm.
Traditional intel teams, they are identifying those current or emerging threats. And that enables technical defenses and also cues the threat hunt team. Hey, threat hunt, here's something that's coming down the pipe. These attacks just started happening to some of our peer companies. So we could be a target or could have been already targeted. So here's some indicators and behaviors we want you to look at because they may apply to us. Now, while Hunt can look for IOCs, and I don't advocate for that, the behaviors of threat actors is something we find. In the course of our hunts and investigations, we're always turning up things like unknown vulnerabilities that exist, such as like misconfigurations, risky behavior, like admin behavior, or missing controls. Like, hey, this is happening. Why is this user allowed to do this? A regular user installing remote management tools, for example. That doesn't make sense. So we find a lot of those things. And that's a different type of intelligence. What we're providing in that case is like truly organic enterprise cybersecurity intelligence. When the intel comes from the CTI team and then from the hunt team, and you include things like asset management intelligence, vulnerability management intelligence, with the CFC, all that gets federated and correlated. And it allows the organization to have like a much better holistic understanding of their security posture. They have better understanding of their risks, their exposures, the threats, and potential impacts that they're at risk of. So it allows them to respond appropriately and potentially proactively and faster when all of this is correlated and federated intelligence. And it just becomes a wiser, more aware organization.
Mhm. You mentioned a very key term there, a force multiplier, particularly for organizations that are already stretched. When they begin to unify data between IT and OT, they begin to unify the teams that are delivering security across those silos. It becomes quite a game changer, and gives executives, a leg up as well. So Chris Wiley, talking about from an executive perspective or a leadership standpoint, what actually justifies investing in building a true cyber fusion center? How should executives think about return on investment, their organizational structure, the business value beyond just having better security?
Well, I guess that is kind of the critical question, right? I mean, if you can't find a way to explain it to the executives, then there is no cyber fusion center. It's just money lost. Yeah, I guess the best place to start is with the return on investment, right? Let's be honest. Traditional ROI metrics are garbage. Nobody cares, right? Cost per incident, right? Or number of threats blocked. That doesn't tell an executive anything that's meaningful. The better way to frame it for executives is business continuity. A fusion center dramatically reduces the blast radius during and duration of an incident, right? We go from trying to coordinate across email and ending up with 3 days of downtime for a system to having everyone in the same spot. And now we're down to hours to shut down or stop an incident. So you end up with the ability to calculate that in terms of revenue loss, productivity loss, brand damage. For a mid-sized company, the difference between 3 days down versus 3 hours down can be millions of dollars. I know that in a specific client that we had recently, I definitely saw that where we had a cyber fusion center concept going on, and the difference between let me just lob that over the fence and I'll wait for someone to respond to I'm right here, I'm talking to the guy directly, and I can go ahead and shut down that account. And, if it was OT or operational, then we wouldn't shut down the account, but we would isolate the device. That allowed us to continue and remain productive and allow the operational environment to continue. The next thing is risk reduction, right? The idea that executives can understand risk in terms of probability and impact. A fusion center provides you, or it allows you to reduce both that probability of an attack and also the impact of the attack. Operational efficiency. Those are one of the, like, especially in an OT environment, we talk about whether or not it can save money by reducing the number of silos, allowing people to talk to each other more freely, having people cross-pollinate, for lack of a better term, on some of their skills. That way, people can go ahead and eliminate the waste, right, in that operational efficiency. And then business value, scarcity, right? This is kind of key. The whole idea behind a fusion center providing both business intelligence along with that threat detection, right? So how can I go ahead and take the information that's coming out of my security and find ways to improve the business value? That's what the executives want to know, right? So that Cyber Fusion Center allows you to identify shadow IT. It allows you to identify failed or old pieces of equipment that need to be replaced so that we can go ahead and create better opportunity. Spot insider risk indicators easier, kind of like what Chris Whiteman was talking about threat behaviors, ensure compliance, because almost all these organizations have to be compliant for, PII, GDPR, NERC, SIP, you name it. There's a variety of different compliance factors. So the Cyber Fusion Center investment brings back in that ability to be compliant proactively, not only when we're having an inspection, but always knowing in advance where your compliance factors sit.
So it sounds to me like a lot of what you're describing is a term we use a lot, which is business resilience.
That is definitely.
Is there more that goes into business resilience, which is not just keeping your business secure, but keeping it operational, minimizing any downtime or eliminating downtime, minimizing costs, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is business resilience, and we're looking for that pitch to the client, right? We're looking for that pitch to the executives. We're spending X amount of money on security tools and team. A fusion center consolidates that investment into a single unified capability that responds faster, catches threats earlier, provides operational intelligence across the business, along with that business intelligence. The alternative is continuing to pay for fragmented teams that can't keep pace.
So when we're talking to the executives or the managers who are having to keep track of the metrics to understand return on investment or to understand business value or to understand operational efficiency, what metrics should executives measure? What should Fusion Center managers track to measure true effectiveness? And how do you judge real success at the front line in a cyber fusion center?
A big question and super important. One of the most important things, I think, is the metrics and the measurements. And I think, much of the answer flows from the top down, and then it's going to go back up again. So when I think about the value of a CFC, I think it comes primarily from speed of quality information flow that allows the effectuation of defense response or continuous proactive hardening. Traditional metrics like mean time to detection or mean time to respond or remediate are still effective, but there's so many other metrics beyond that to help executives understand the unseen value. Some of these things are early identification, remediation of vulnerabilities on a constant basis, vice a vuln management team just doing quarterly or maybe monthly scans. So now you're accelerating remediation. And vuln scans don't identify behavioral issues that may be identified by threat hunt or insider threat teams.
Mm-hmm.
So those are metrics like, hey, mean time to remediate would be for a vulnerability that's been found. Not remediate an attack, but remediate vulnerabilities and track how quickly you're closing those holes is something that you can measure in the vuln scan piece. If a CFC is operating well, they should be proposing changes to policy and technical controls. And all those things are helpful. Policy changes are huge if a CFC can have such an impact across the enterprise. And they can recommend, hey, we're seeing this trend of RMM tools or poor behavior or hygiene, cyber hygiene by the users. And it allows the CFC or the CISO to send out enterprise-wide memos, just reinforcing memos like, hey, remember your training, this isn't allowed, this is risky, so don't do it. And that's like a direct impact that a CFC has across the enterprise. All those are measurable things. They can be tracked over time. How many policies were written as a result of our efforts? How many memos went out? And that shows value and impact at the CISO level.
Mm-hmm.
They can be tracked over time, ensure continuous improvement and the effectiveness of the CFC. Now, when I say like top down, essentially, as Mr. Weule was saying, like CISO needs to prove value and effectiveness of the CFC initiative and any associated investments. So they need to define those metrics. And then the CFC is the organization that would put the processes and the data collection in place to provide that information to the CISO. Every team is going to be collecting their own metrics, or they should be individually to measure themselves so they know that they are continuously improving. But among those metrics needs to be the data collection that supports the CFC data collection requirements, who would then compile those and feed that insight back up to the CISO to provide that justification to the board and explain why this was a good decision, continues to be so, and deserves additional investment.
I would also add that there are some metrics that most organizations need to stop using. Right? I mean, like, stop using the number of alerts closed, right? Or tickets resolved, right? This just incentivizes speed over accuracy. It incentivizes a quantity over a quality. I want to know whether or not the investigation was any good, not whether or not they closed the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Or, stop measuring time to detect. Detection doesn't matter if containment is slow, right? So Whiteman was sitting there talking about how long does it take for them to close the vulnerability, right? Not detect the vulnerability. So I've got 1 million vulnerabilities. We're going to go ahead and sign off on this vulnerability. Yeah, it exists, but we left it open. That doesn't help anyone, right? Stop using 0 false positives, because that probably means that you have 0 detection, not that you have 0 that you actually have false positives or that you have positives. Just that you've got everything so tightly contained that you can't actually see anything inside your network,
Mm-hmm.
right? Stop measuring productivity by an individual analyst. It shouldn't be on an individual analyst. You guys are working as a team, right? A fusion center succeed through collaboration, right? Measuring an individual in isolation undermines the teamwork, right? And it makes people build sandcastles, right? Waiting for the tide to come in.
Yeah, you mentioned teams working together, individuals working as a team, which seems to be quite an interesting concept in most IT organizations. And one of the hardest challenges is breaking down the silos between security, IT operations, threat intelligence, incident response. All teams that have a throw it over the fence mentality, quite often, that's not my job, that's someone else's. Chris Mosley, what practical steps have you seen that actually work out there to help break down these silos? And where is it that most organizations get it wrong? They fail.
So there's a couple examples I could think of there. One of them was one that we used as our group here, where every day we'd log in for the morning, whether we were in the office or whether we were online. We all had this nice big call where everybody could join in, and it was I not everybody joined, but it was available to everybody if they wanted to. Now I know that me, Wiley, we were in there almost all the time, and there was a couple other people that would join us, and it was great to break down those silos because everybody that joined wasn't necessarily on the same team, but at the same time, that line of communication was always open, but it wasn't always for work stuff. And when you talk to somebody not work related, you build that relationship so you feel a lot more comfortable reaching out to them in the case of, hey, I need something work related done. You don't feel like, oh, I'm bothering them, or I don't want to add more to their plate. You treat them more as like a colleague or a friend rather than like, oh, this is just my coworker who has their own stuff going on. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's one example. Another one comes from one of my previous jobs where it was a little similar, but not quite the same. Where we would go through, you log in the morning, same thing if you're in the office or remote. You'd log in, and it would just be like a 15-minute call, beginning of the day. Hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm working on. And if you have like if say like Wiley's working on something and he's like, hey, I'm working on like this specific issue. I solved that issue yesterday and I know how to fix it. I can be like, hey, here's how to solve it. Here's the documentation. That saves him hours and hours of work because I did the hours and hours of work yesterday. You know what I mean? That was just another one of the examples. Another thing that definitely helps is being in person with like an asterisk tied to that one, because in our example, when we were in the office, we had all of the teams as part of the CFC were in the same room. So if I needed to talk to like somebody from Threat Hunt or somebody from the command center, I could just be like, hey, you know, where are you at with this thing? Where are we at? Can you do this thing for me? Like I could just walk to their desk. I didn't have to send them a message and wait, hours and hours for a response or wonder where they're at. I can physically see them. I can go talk to them.
Mhm.
That also helps with that like just human connection of you can talk to this person face to face. You don't have to have a screen in the way. And a lot of places get that wrong because they either don't have an in-office approach and they go full remote. And if they go full remote, they don't have that daily call that's up all day. So everybody's just isolated, and all you have to go off of is their team status. And we've established, well, maybe not in the podcast, but as technicians have established that people will do everything they can to appear online when they're not. So it definitely can be misleading when you reach out to somebody and it says they're online and you don't get a response for hours. Whereas if they're in a call all day and you just like, hey, are you there? I need to talk to you about something. Yeah, I'm here. Let's talk about it. Right? It's like it's super quick. It's super easy. And a lot of places don't do anything like that. A lot of places don't even do the quick 15-minute call in the morning.
I would say that what Mosley's saying here about a shared physical space or a shared virtual space is, it sounds simple, but it's incredibly powerful, right? When threat hunters sit next to incident responders that sit next to IT ops engineers, your collaboration happens naturally, right? It just, you overhear conversations, you oversee investigations that are taking place, right? You get to hear about the resolutions for
Mhm.
these problems. Mosley went ahead and referenced, like, I did that work yesterday. Here's the solution. When we were all in a shared space, either virtually or physically in the same space, you actually get to hear these people talking about the challenge that they're dealing with. And in advance when you see it again that that solution already exists and you can reach out to the guy who worked on it, right? And then it also propagates across the entire team. And then because the incident responders were dealing with something, then the threat hunters go, by the way, since I know this thing exists, let me go look for it somewhere else in the environment.
Chris, if I could add on to that, like what I found in some of my previous positions is with that, like everyone being in such tight spaces with a very tight shop space wise. So you hear pretty much all the conversations and you hear people complaining about, yeah, I have to do this and then I have to do this and then do this and separate it out and do the analysis. And some people like the hunters or more technical people can say that can be automated and it's really not that hard. So I can save you hours and hours of work if you just tell me what you're doing, your process, and let's make that happen in 30 seconds rather than 8, 16 hours. So there is that benefit because you don't hear the problems people are having, the challenges, like you both said. So that's another really strong opportunity. And even if it's a remote team, having that space where people freely express the challenges and what they're going through. Like Mosley, you were saying, like, there's a call always going. So you can always kind of blurt out to everybody, does anyone know how to do this? Here's what I'm facing. And then you get a collective solution and it resolves problems faster and everybody hears the solution. So I think that's a powerful thing too. And as Wiley said, it's not easy to get people in that culture to freely ask questions, freely communicate, say, this is my problem, or this is not my problem. So those things conversely are effectively the same. Anyway, just wanted to add that.
So, Chris Wiley, back in my operation days, we would create tiger teams from, a representative from different parts of the organization who all came together to handle an incident, right? How does that methodology, and I know that that's probably a leftover from the operations center days, but how does that methodology work or apply in a cyber fusion center?
So I'm going to rhetorically throw a question back at you. How long does it take to go ahead and form the tiger team to go ahead and then solve the problem? Was it hours? Was it days? Was it weeks? Every time I saw it in the military, right, they'd be like, oh, we need to form a tiger team. And the tiger team would then have a meeting about what meetings they wanted to have. And then they would go ahead and begin to have a meeting about meeting number one. Are we going to discuss the problem or not? Why are we here? And it was generally, well, I'm going to go ahead and choose you to be on the tiger team. Not the person who actually knew what was going on, not the person who was dealing with the problem on a database. It was, maybe one of those cherry positions. We want you to have some visibility on the tiger team. I want to get the problem solved. Now, from a cyber fusion perspective, since you're all working in a common environment, you're all working on common data, you're all working on unified platforms, hopefully that's what you're getting to, right? Then you are essentially a permanent tiger team, right? We're not waiting to form one. It's already there, waiting to attack the problem. When I look at the idea of tiger teams, I mean, in concept, they were great. In reality, they rarely got things done, except if someone went ahead and authorized them to have like full authority, and then they could just go bulldoze an entire environment. And that didn't happen very often. The idea behind having a fusion center is something I mentioned in that first question, right? The ability or authority to be able to operate when you need to, the ability to isolate the device when a thing happens, the ability to reset an account or block a person. You prioritize your devices so that you know in advance, this is an IT device, it's a laptop. If I wanted to go ahead and isolate that or immediately take it offline and not let it talk to the network anymore, I can. With a tiger team, you would end up having, the team go, okay, now let's do some research about what we know about this device, right? That's always secondary. It's always reactive. So the tiger team approach is always a reactive approach. The idea behind a cyber fusion center is that it's proactive. We know in advance what those devices are. We know in advance what vulnerabilities those devices have. We know in advance where we are in that remediation process and what intelligence we have that has been built up around the device, around the threats, before they become a problem, and that we are working to remediate them ahead of time. Does that answer it fully?
It does. Actually, you went exactly where I expected you to go. I was leading the witness. Well, that's great. I appreciate the three Chris's joining on this call today. As we wrap up, always have a key takeaway. A cyber fusion center is not a thing. It's not a tool. It's not a room. It's not a title. It's a way of operating. Organizations that succeed with cyber fusion don't win because they have more technology. They win because they align people, intelligence, and response around the realities of the business, not just the alerts on the screen. When done right, CyberFusion centers detect threats early, they reduce response friction, they develop stronger talent, and they turn security into a resilience function, not a cost center. If today's conversation made anything clear, it's this. The future of security isn't more silos and more dashboards and more noise. It's fusion, clarity, and coordinated action. Thanks for joining us on the CyberFusion Report. I'm Gary Mullen, and we'll see you next time. This has been the CyberFusion Report podcast. Thanks for joining us, and for more information, please visit www.phishcloud.com or email us at cfc@phishcloud.com. Thanks and have a great day.